This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Evan Jansen. The show, of course, live, broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Now, we're also live on YouTube right now. If you can't watch us on television at home, you can do so at the office. Our show is also available on demand on a YouTube channel that you can watch throughout the rest of the day at your leisure. Now, today, we deal with the final remains of those that died during the Nigerian building collapse in September last year. They're expected home soon. Also, we close the book on the AU summit and talk about some of the controversial decisions that were taken there. We get an update as the flood situation in Mozambique and Malawi worsens. Also, we close with a look at South Africa's street stores that have now gone global. But first, let's get today's news from Katrina Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrina Malan, and let's just take a look at those top stories this morning. The Thulamela municipality in Limpopo says it is not responsible for the provision of basic services such as water and sanitation to Malamulele. Residents of Malamulele are into the fourth week of a total shutdown of services. Police have confirmed that 6 offices in an administration block at Malamulele High School have been burnt. The residents are demanding their own municipality. They accuse the Thulamela municipality of not delivering basic services to the area. Police say they believe arsonists started the fire.
The people of Malamulele should understand that in a municipality we need peace and stability because we need development. Unless we have peace and stability, we won't have investors who will come to our area.
The South African Human Rights Commission has called on government to act on sporadic attacks on immigrants and the looting of their businesses across the country. According to the Commission, by acknowledging the xenophobic undertones to these attacks enables those responsible in dealing with these challenges to do so. Meanwhile, local business owners in Soweto have reiterated that they want foreign shop owners to leave the area and calls on government to back them.
The bottom line is that they are here. They live among us. The Constitution protects them. The Bill of Rights protects them.
Commuters have again been left stranded this morning as the Ria Vaya bus driver strike enters its second day. Hundreds of commuters were left stranded without warning in the Johannesburg CBD and various Ria Vaya pickup points across the city yesterday. A South African military aircraft is on its way to Nigeria to collect the remains of the remaining South Africans who were killed when a church building collapsed in Lagos, Nigeria last year. 85 South Africans were killed in the incident. Only 74 bodies were positively identified and brought back to South Africa. It's still unclear how many of the remaining bodies will be repatriated. There's still been no claim of responsibility for a bomb blast in the city of Gombe. The explosion went off at President Goodluck Jonathan's campaign rally minutes after the head of state left the venue. 2 female suicide bombers are suspected to have set off the blast. Jonathan is standing for re-election on the 14th of February against former military ruler Muhammadu Buhari. Now remember, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can then also keep up to date with our journalists on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. A South African military aircraft left yesterday to Nigeria to collect the remains of the remaining South Africans who were killed when a church building collapsed in Lagos in September of last year. 85 South Africans were killed in the incident. Up until now, only 74 bodies have been positively identified and brought back to the country. It's still unclear how many of the remaining 11 bodies will be repatriated.
Nearly 6 months on, and the families of some of the victims are yet to find closure. It's been a long and agonizing wait for some of those whose loved ones perished in that tragedy in Lagos last year. While the latest news might bring hope of finally closing that chapter, might not be for everyone, as it's not yet clear whether all or some of the bodies will be coming home on Thursday.
We should also recall that this is not a process that is led by the South African government. All the verification and the testing is done by the Nigerian authorities. Ours is to provide the necessary information in order to ensure that that process is finally concluded.
85 South Africans were killed in the building collapse in September last year. 74 bodies were brought back home 2 months later. Since then, authorities have been working to identify the rest. The injured have all been discharged from hospitals and have been reunited with their families. The Nigerian authorities have opened an inquest into the tragedy.
Our Consular General, who's based in Lagos, has a watching brief so that we can be able to be put abreast of the developments of that inquest taking place there.
The plane is likely to touch down at Waterkloof Air Force Base early Thursday morning. Yuri Sanjamela, SABC News, Pretoria.
Now, for the latest, we have in the studio with us this morning the Acting Chief Executive Officer of Government's Communication and Information Systems, Phumla Williams. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Eben.
We've pretty much seen an update. Now, our team is there at the moment. What sort of process are they involved with today and the next couple of days? And then can you maybe give us an update on the latest developments?
Thank you very much. I think it's been a very difficult 4 months for us as government, as a team that has been following the story, but also importantly for the families themselves. I think it's been a very most difficult Christmas for them. But yes, coming to the briefing that the minister gave yesterday, which is more or less the latest as we have it, a military aircraft has been dispatched based on the brief that was given to us by the Nigerian that we can come over. They have left to go and collect the positively identified bodies. But unfortunately, as you will note in our briefing, we were not able to say how many are coming and who are coming. And a part of that is because the verification and the finalization and a proper briefing is only going to be happening sometime today. But we have interacted with the families to inform them that we have dispatched this plane to collect the remains. But unfortunately, we still do not know. But we've made an assurance to them that as soon as we get the list, knowing which provinces will be coming from and where are the stage of the verification from the laboratory, we will communicate with them almost immediately. In fact, I should say, speaking here, that the information is not going to be communicated to them via the media. No. We will communicate directly to the families, and most probably the media will be the last to know, because I think it is only fair for the families not to hear it from yourselves.
Yeah, it's been a very difficult couple of months, 4 or 5 months for the families, and this is such a deeply personal issue that affects a family so deeply and over a long period of time. I want to talk quickly, without politicizing it, about what has happened on this day and then the months that followed on. Has it had any effect on the relationship between South Africa and Nigeria?
I think probably if I'm to say that we have had a wonderful relationship in this whole a period of 4 months, to be exact, because Eben, you will recall that even transporting back the injured, I don't think we would have done it on our own. It was done within 3 weeks after the stabilizing of those victims. It was done in consultation with the Nigerian authorities. The 74, which are at the time when it was happening, I was there. I can confirm that we were interacting with the Nigerians throughout the process of verifying and consolidating. You will recall even at that time, there was a whole hype with the media saying it's 54, and we kept saying, let's wait until we finalize. That finalization, which is quite a laborious exercise, was done with the Nigerian assisting us, and we were able to confirm the 74. The 11 that was outstanding, yes, we could agree with the Nigerians, because at that time there was no positive results from the laboratory. And I think we've always committed to these families that we will not traumatize them twice by bringing bodies that are not positively identified. At that time, we agreed with them that the 11 could not be positively identified. But I think we were assured that it was not all lost. They can still do further tests, and that's the result that has led us to today that we are going to collect.
These tests were done at the CSIR in Stellenbosch?
Yes, they were done in South Africa.
Tell us quickly about the level of cooperation that you're having with the Nigerian government with regards to the inquest, if there is any input that is needed or desired from South Africa?
I don't think we are involved in that inquest, but safe to say that we are also waiting patiently for the outcome of that inquest, because I think as a South African government we have an interest. Our citizens perished in that building, and I think we have an interest. We have always said that we will cooperate with the Nigerians should we be required to get involved, but we are waiting for the outcome of that inquest. And I think once that inquest comes, I think we owe it to the families really to know what really happened and what killed their loved ones.
How do you view Pastor TB Joshua within this whole process? There have been promises the last couple of months of him coming to South Africa to speak to the families. Yes, there have been members of the church that have done sort of conciliatory work. But how do you view TB Joshua within this process? And also, you know, the kind of arguments that's been put forward about planes that made the building collapse and all these kinds of things?
I think it would be unfair of us to be passing judgment on a church. Our focus is to bring back the South Africans that perished in that building. The South Africans that went to that church, they are members of that church. Yes, an accident happened, and I think the church themselves are doing their bit in providing the counseling services to those families. Yeah. But I think at this point, we would like to confine ourselves to assisting South Africans as a caring government. And it's at that point, I don't think we have views on any church, because I think the churches are providing their own programs within their communities.
In conclusion, we've seen more South Africans traveling there over the festive season, going to not only TB Joshua's church, but other churches in Nigeria and so forth. How do you advise South Africans traveling abroad for these kinds of scenarios? How do you advise them now?
Thank you very much, Eben, for that question, because I think what the lesson that we have learned in this exercise is that I think we do need to educate South Africans that I think we need to be accountable when we leave the borders of this country. Yeah. Because you will recall at the beginning, I think a few days was wasted because we were unsure that there were South Africans. The Department of International Relations has a program online where if you are leaving South Africa, just spend a few minutes into that website, log in where you will be going and where will be, because I think it makes the life very easy for us as government to be able to know which citizens are in what place. And especially when there's an accident like this, it would have been much quicker for ITECO to intervene through the embassy if we had known that there were South Africans there.
Well, I can say from our side what we've seen, this was a political minefield that you guys worked through, and you've done, as government, done a fantastic job, not only in repatriating the body, but also not ruffling feathers, because it was such a difficult scenario that played out for everyone involved. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Eben.
That's Pumla Williams, who's the Acting Chief Executive Officer of GCIS, that's Government Communication and Information Systems here in South Africa. But let's have a quick look at your tweets. What are you talking about on Twitter with regards to this? Connie says this morning, thoughts and prayers with the families of the victims of the Nigerian collapse incidents. Unbearable that the bodies are not back yet. Hashtag TB Joshua. Yes, it's been a difficult process, but you can understand it's a building that collapsed, and in this space, people remains and DNA had to be exhumed and looked at. At the last, remains of some 11 souls may be coming home 4 months later. I hope families may find some closure. That's from Bonesetter. And then Beyond X says, it turns Nigerian government is withholding repatriation of 11 South African corpses from TB Joshua, now 8 months. No, it's 5 months, in exchange for weapons to fight Boko Haram. Really? I think that Beyond X, that's a little bit beyond me, to be honest. Sam says, what is South Africa's stance on representing their bereaved members of the TB Joshua tragedy? I would think they can act on behalf of them. If I am... And then, as it says, South Africa's taxpayers are forking out the money for the planes and DNA testing. Why not send the bill to TB Joshua? Well, there are South Africans that perished in this building collapse, and we look after our own in South Africa. Now I'm joined by Mr. Bali Chweni, who's the spokesperson for the Synagogue Church of All Nations here in South Africa. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, sir.
A little bit of difficulty in the traffic you had this morning?
Yes, indeed.
It's Johannesburg. We deal with that. We accept it in our stride and we move on.
Yeah.
I've just had Pumla Williams with us, who says that this process is now reaching the final stages.
Mm-hmm.
As the church, how do you view this, and what would you like to see happen with the remains that needs to be repatriated within the next week or two?
I mean, let me first start by saying that really what the Nigerian government has done to date in respect of assisting in the DNA process, so that those particular bodies that could come to South Africa, we applaud them for the wonderful job they've done. Equally, the South African government, the tremendous role that they've played in ensuring that this particular issue, difficult as it is, I think both parties need to be applauded for the wonderful job done.
It's been a very difficult 5 months, 6 months, 5 months for everyone involved in this process. TB Joshua has been made out to be a very controversial figure in this whole process, almost as if somebody needed to be blamed for it. It was a tragedy. The question that all our viewers want to know is, TB Joshua said he's going to come to South Africa to come and deal with this on a very personal level. When do we see TB Joshua in South Africa?
You mean Prophet TB Joshua?
Yes.
Prophet TB Joshua has made an announcement, and that announcement stands. And the announcement was to the following effect, that yes, he has committed himself to coming to South Africa because he views this particular tragedy as is so serious, and as part of him ensuring that, he builds a very cohesive relationship with the South Africans and support them, he wants to be able to come here. Now, we want first to wait for the repatriation to finish. We are in the last zone of this particular repatriation. After that, then the process of coming to South Africa will start.
What about the incident itself that happened? Terrorism was to blame. It was the devil's work. Where does the church stand on the reasons for the tragedy that happened?
I think the church has always maintained, and that is the case, that this particular collapse really is a sabotage. And as a matter of interest, as we speak right now, the equivalent of the Human Rights Association in Nigeria, together with the other associations of public standing in Nigeria, they are in the process of petitioning the Nigerian government because they say that there is a particular report. That report gives details as to exactly what happened in respect of the sabotage. Now, that particular process will take its own course. But it also just demonstrates and supports the view that we've been saying. And it's a very firm view that what has transpired here is a sabotage. Yes, the corona inquest is, on hold at the moment. We are hoping that, in due course, after all the teething problems are over, we can get back to go through that particular process. What has been the difficulty with your prophet appearing before the commission? I think, again, we have articulated this particular view before. The prophet has never had a problem in appearing. Briefly, to take you through what transpired at first, he wasn't served with the necessary papers. Subsequently, he was served with papers after the government followed the necessary process. Now, what the church and the prophet have done basically is to bring another application to be able to say, Corona, you are now getting into the realm of issues that are completely irrelevant for the purposes of why, by law, why the corona is established and what it seeks to do. So we basically want to clarify so that you get the shaft out and deal with the real pertinent issues as to what really transpired as far as this collapse is concerned. Tell us about the process of taking families to Nigeria, bereaved family members and so forth that we've seen. How has that process proceeded over the last few months? I think, the best witnesses in this particular respect are the families themselves. Their testimonies of their experience from a spiritual perspective when they visited the church, and how they are in the process of emotionally healing They have articulated it very well themselves to say they are very happy with what the church has done. The church has been in constant communication with them throughout this particular process, and we will remain with all the families until all of them have been repatriated home.
We've got different numbers flying around at the moment, but the church has made some financial reparation to the bereaved families. Can you give us a bit of detail on that?
Well, I think the first amount that was made available, if you're talking purely monetary specifically, was the 50,000 that went through the burial services. But that was actually preceded by an ordinate amount of money that went through to support the families from a variety of perspectives. I mean, paying the rental, paying the bond, paying the school fees. And in as far as the school fees, we are right now in that particular process of paying those particular school fees to make sure that, the children do not get disadvantaged in any way.
Well, I thank you for coming through to us and talking to us about this. It's been a very long, arduous process, and finally, we seems like we are getting to the end of the line for these families. What kind of time frame are you hoping for the repatriating of the last last 11 bodies?
Well, that particular aspect really is left to government, that is respectively the Nigerian government and South African government. I think they've been handled the process very well. Let's leave that to them. At the church, we really just play a supportive role in that respect.
I thank you for coming today. That's the Synagogue Church of All Nations spokesperson, Mr. Balichwene, who joined us live after Pumla Williams gave us the official scenarios a little bit earlier. I thank you once again.
Thank you very much, sir.
Now, we move on and we look at the tweet of the day. Now, today's tweet, well, the top tweet is still on, Nigerian issues, but something a little bit different. Talking about Boko Haram, we're talking about, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Terrorism in particular, of Boko Haram, requires a response that is collective and decisive. Can we have a look at the tweet, guys? Can you put it up? Decisive and effective to achieve the desired results. Can we have that tweet? No? Okay, I can't see it, obviously. I'm obviously in the wrong place. But let's move on now and have a look at the front pages from around the globe now, elsewhere in the world. Passionate story in the United Kingdom. The Times reporting that the Prince of Wales has told ministers that he no longer wants to promote British arms sales in the Arab world. This according to an authoritative new biography. Now, down under in Australia, the Daily Telegraph reports that Tony Abbott says he will fight to remain Prime Minister. This is his job hangs in the balance, with senior cabinet colleagues conceding his leadership could be beyond repair. Yes, this is also the man that said all immigrants must leave Australia. How can you leave a country when you yourself, sir, are an immigrant in Australia? The Jerusalem Post says President Reuven Rivlin called on Israelis and Palestinians in Hebron to live together peacefully when he visited the West Bank city that is often a flashpoint for violence between the two populations. Now, before we go to an ad break, let's just take a quick look at what's happening inside and outside of our country today. There you see in Johannesburg, Stats South Africa, that's Statistics South Africa, will release a report on national poverty lines. We move to the capital, Pretoria. The Portfolio Committee on Communications is expected to conduct an oversight visit to state-owned entities regarding their 2014-15 financial year targets. In Centurion and in Durban's regional court, the trial of Dr. Genshin Rughunath, his wife and 3 others accused of prostitution and running a brothel with girls as young as 12, is set to continue there. We'll keep you updated as to how that develops over the next couple of days. This is Newsroom. We'll be back with you after a short break.
Zoom into Africa. This is Gabon. The president is Mr. Ali Ben Bongo. Gabon got independent from France on August 17 in 1960. The population is over 1 million people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is CFA.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom. Now, African Union leaders are demanding that the International Criminal Court should drop or suspend charges against Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir and Kenyan Deputy President William Ruto until African concerns about the court and proposals to change its founding treaty are considered. The African Union has accused the ICC of disproportionately targeting Africans. Still, from the summit, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe doubled responsibility of leading both the AU and the sub-region as chair of the South African Development Community SADC after he was elected chairperson at the 24th summit in Addis Ababa. Among the issues also discussed at the summit include the escalation of terrorism in Africa and independent funding for the African Union and the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Now, to unpack the summit and the issues discussed is researcher and political analyst from Good Governance Africa, Kate Stegeman, and from the South African Institute of International Affairs, we have senior researcher Stephen Grudds. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Hi.
Kate, let's start with your area of expertise. The African Court, it seems, is in the offing to sort of downplay the work of the ICC. How do you view this outcome? Isn't that a little bit controversial and maybe putting a stake in the ground with regards to how the world is run these days?
Absolutely. Although we have problems with the International Criminal Court, and it is very concerning that they only prosecute African sitting heads of state and various other sort of human rights abuses from the continent, and we can see the arguments why it could be considered anti-colonial and racist. The fact of the matter is that the African Court is not necessarily the right solution. It's incredibly controversial. It's basically, in a nutshell, the poacher becoming the gatekeeper. We just don't think that there's enough political will, enough independence, that these leaders are not going to protect their own. We don't think that leaders are going to stand up. We don't think that Kenyatta, etc., are going to say, oh, it's fine for al-Bashir to be prosecuted for genocide or human rights crimes, either genocide in Darfur or human rights crimes in South Sudan. And then, you know, it's okay, I'll be protected for electoral violence, and so will Ruto. It's just not going to happen. And the fact of the matter as well is, while we might have some of the skills and capacity legally within the continent to set up the African Court, we just simply are unable to afford to be able to do these prosecutions. So we already have the system with the ICC. It's not perfect, but at least there is enough independence that they would be able to hopefully prosecute these leaders in a way where they got a free and fair trial.
Stephen, how do you view this? Africa won't be able to police itself?
Well, I agree with Kate in that it is controversial and that the ICC has already got endorsement from 30 African countries are members of the Rome Statute. It seems to me that there's been so much controversy over these two particular cases, Kenya and Sudan, that the leaders are have been politicking heavily over the last 4, 5, 6 years to actually now try and establish an African alternative. The truth is that African courts have been very weak. Those based in Banjul, in the Gambia, the African Court of Human and People's Rights, and those in Tanzania, the tribunal, have been very, very weak. We've seen the SADC tribunal disbanded because it had a ruling against President Robert Mugabe. So I also am doubtful, and it seems like a political maneuver to save the bacon of these particular leaders.
What about the International Criminal Court then, guys? If we look at the track record of it, it's, as you say yourself, it's quick to jump on African leaders, but war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in the Middle East ad nauseum, really, in recent times, but nothing seems to happen with these, with the leaders there and elsewhere in the world.
That's partly because the countries themselves are not referring their leaders for prosecution at the ICC, so it's quite a complicated process in terms of referral. But absolutely, I mean, if you look at the former Yugoslavia, they have their own commission set up in The Hague to prosecute those leaders. And now why, instead of setting up that own commission, why could he not be put ahead of the ICC? Because then that would possibly put to bed this argument that the ICC is biased against African leaders. So, of course, that there are institutional mechanisms and there are problems with the way the ICC runs. And, of course, we know it's not ratified by various other leaders from big countries such as the US, and that's problematic. So I think African leaders and African people, for that matter, might be more accepting if they were a little bit more consistent about who they prosecuted and if they had the evidence. So if Ocampo, our previous prosecutor, were to come forward and say, I've got accurate evidence against these countries, let's try and actively encourage someone to refer the court case, then yes, that would work. But that's an ideal scenario.
I have a feeling that this one is not going to go away very quickly. I don't think there is a solution that will serve everybody within this case. But let's move on to some of the other scenarios, Stephen, that's come out of the summit. I think the most high-profile one is probably the election of Robert Mugabe. Some of the major newspapers around the world reports Africa had got what it has been crying for, quote unquote, by appointing Mugabe. Is that a true assessment of the election of the current AU head?
Well, the system of electing the chairperson of the African Union or the president of the African Union is a rotational one. A lot of African institutions work like this, that if it's the turn of North Africa, East, West, and Central. So it was Southern Africa's turn, and they chose President Mugabe. You can't pick the team or the captain of the team for your opponents. It's obviously going to make news. He is a politician that the West loves to hate. He also uses every opportunity to rail against the West and the colonialists. You remember in the days of Bush and Blair, he loved to have rhetorical flourishes and condemn them for all the problems of Zimbabwe. I think it does pose a problem. I think it brings into question the credibility of the African Union. They've chosen a man who turns 91 on the 21st of February. He really represents the old Africa. The AU was meant to be a step away from the Organization of African Unity and a way to project a progressive and a less conservative institution.
You talk about the old Africa, and in a way, I'd like to make this analogy. The old Africa tried to have relations with the West to its own detriment for hundreds and hundreds of years. The new Africa is looking towards China. And is this not maybe a rubber stamp that, thank you, but we have to look elsewhere because you simply do not treat us as equals? That's African leaders and the continent. You, for hundreds and hundreds of years, have plundered our resources with very little development. When we deal with China, at least we see development in our countries.
Well, I'm going to jump in there. I think relations between China and Zimbabwe are particularly problematic. I mean, most South African viewers will remember when we had that U-ship laden with arms en route to Zimbabwe. We had civil society stand up. We had dock workers and various legal mechanisms in South Africa and various people standing up and saying that's unacceptable. So unfortunately, whether or not development is good from China on a human rights level, relations between China and Zimbabwe aren't particularly good. So while the Chinese might like Mugabe, while they might be getting good development deals all around the continent, if we go back to a human rights discourse, which is really what this court is supposed to be all about and what the African Union is supposed to stand for, they just speak the language.
Isn't that the UN, isn't that the ICC have the same issues?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's certainly a political move. It was not an accident. It was done deliberately. And part of it is just, I guess, to say to the West, we will choose who we want. It's his turn. He's a respected African leader, and he is part of the African Union. He has strong support from other heads of state, and he always has had. And it is a little, in some ways it is the AU standing up to the West and saying, back off. And in some of his pronouncements on gender and other things that he was interviewed at the summit, he made those points. He said, the West can do what they like. We're going to do what we like.
There's one quick point as well. There has been a precedent where they blocked al-Bashir a few years ago when it was supposed to go to the East, and then it was the chairmanship was given to Ghana. So in this particular instance, they could have done that as well. Sorry, we're not happy with Mugabe. Take the chairmanship elsewhere.
Well, Africa is saying we are not happy with the way you've been treating us for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's time for you to change the way you do business with us. Barack Obama was in South Africa last year, made all the promises in the world. We've seen very little coming out of that visit in, let's call it, dollars and cents. But we move on to the final issue, security. The African Union is now putting its own forces together, going to deal with security. I want to ask you in conclusion to wrap that. And then I want to ask you about importing violence into other countries if we go down this route.
Well, I mean, obviously the most topical thing coming out of the summit this weekend and what's been all over the news and what we're all concerned about in particular is Boko Haram and how that basically is going to be stopped in its tracks. And what we've had is former leaders of the UN, such as Kofi Annan, etc., say, no, Nigeria needs to deal with this problem, the region needs to deal with the problem. And what is Goodluck Jonathan willing to accept in terms of foreign intervention and what that means? Should it be the region? Should it be the continent? And it's incredibly complicated. But the fact of the matter is that the Nigerian army does not have the capacity to stop the onslaught of Boko Haram. We need a regional intervention. It's in the region's best interest. We need ECOWAS or the AU to step in and say this is unacceptable.
Stephen, if we send troops, are we going to import violence? I had an expert tell me last week that we've got Boko Haram's dormant cells here in South Africa. If we make a move, they will become active.
Well, unfortunately, we see these groups taking vengeance. We've seen with the Japanese journalist who was killed and ISIS, etc. They like to target nationals from countries that are fighting against them and fight and create public opinion against these particular incursions. I don't know that whether it would definitely come to South Africa, but there is that risk. On the other hand, I think international terrorism has to be stood up against. And as you said earlier, Dr. Dlamini Zuma said that you need a collective and strong response. So that's a risk that you take. But it's also about standing up for what you believe in and not letting a country like Nigeria crumble. Africa can't afford for Nigeria to be a failed state.
It's our biggest economy we have on the continent. If it goes, it will cause a huge cavern. But I thank you. We've run out of time. I wish we had more time. Could do an entire show on this because we're talking about the African century, and this should be the cornerstones of that. Thank you very much for joining us today. That is Kate Stegman, who is a political analyst from Good Governance Africa, and then from the South African Institute of International Affairs, Stephen Griest. Now, let's have a quick look at your view. What do you say on these matters? At SABC Newsroom is where we've taken it. Melissa Malaika says, out of all available presidents, state leaders across Africa thought that Mugabe was the best place to lead the AU. It was a political statement, Melissa. Onyango Alfred says, when ex-suspects and suspects team up to form a court of justice, then know the whistleblowers are the targets. Talking about the AU summit there. The 24th AU forms multinational joint task force to combat Boko Haram, and they also launched the AU Foundation, which would be that one from Safriat Yusuf. Those are some of your views. Now let's take a look at our picture of the day. This one comes from Horisani Sitole on Malamulele. Now we know there's been violence overnight where a school was set alight following weeks of protests in the area. Of course, the Municipal Demarcation Board voted against giving them their own municipality on Friday last week. It's been a very uneasy couple of days since then. Now, police are currently in the area. They're investigating that case of arson that you see on the picture there. 6 buildings were torched there last night. At least that's the report that I have. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back with you shortly.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Well, hello and welcome back here with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just take a look at those top stories this morning. The Thulamela municipality in Limpopo says it is not responsible for the provision of basic services such as water and sanitation to Malamulele. Residents of Malamulele are into the 4th week of a total shutdown of services. Police have confirmed that 6 offices in an administration block at Malamulele High School have been burnt. The residents are demanding their own municipality. They accuse the Thulamela municipality of not delivering basic services to their area. Police say they believe arsonists started the fire. The South African Human Rights Commission has called on government to act on sporadic attacks on immigrants and the looting of their businesses across the country. According to the Commission, by acknowledging the xenophobic undertones to these attacks enables those responsible in dealing with these challenges to do so. Meanwhile, local business owners in Soweto have reiterated that they want foreign shop owners to leave the area and calls on government to back them. And a South African military aircraft is on its way to Nigeria to collect the remains of the remaining South Africans who were killed when a church building collapsed in Lagos last year. 85 South Africans were killed in the incident. Only 74 bodies were positively identified and brought back to South Africa. It's still unclear how many of the remaining bodies will be repatriated. Well, remember, all those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also check us out on Twitter. Keep up to date with our journalists on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Now, a year ago, on Newsroom, we introduced you to 2 very inspirational young philanthropists with an innovative plan to bring some comfort to the homeless of Cape Town at that time. The Street Store, the world's first rent-free, premises-free, free pop-up clothing store for the homeless on the streets of Cape Town. It's been 1 year. Now 162 pop-up stores have appeared since all around the world. Let's just take a look at this story.
South Africa, a country where the haves and have-nots live side by side, but seldom connect.
I was living on the street about 13 years, 14 years, 16 years, 17 years. Believe me, I was living on the streets about a long time.
People want to help, but aren't always sure how. And for the homeless, begging is degrading. In partnership with the Haven Night Shelter, the Street Store was born. The world's first rent-free, premises-free, free pop-up store for the homeless. Somewhere safe to give and easy to collect. Made only from posters, people hang up and drop off donations. Then the homeless choose things they actually want and like. For many used to rummaging in bins, this was their first dignified shopping experience.
Shopping at the street store was for me very nice. The people was accepting me with friendly faces.
A week before the pop-up, we called for donations on social media. Within days, we found ourselves on prominent national blogs, news, radio, and TV. But the world wanted in too. Bono's One organization, Huffington Post, Good, and hundreds of others. Over 3,500 homeless were clothed, and millions in free PR was generated. More importantly, we brought people together like never before. But homelessness is international, so we went open source. Anyone can download the artwork and host their own street store. To date, 121 people have signed up. A few simple posters to restore the dignity to the homeless in Cape Town suddenly touched the lives of so many more.
You are sent from heaven. Thank you very much. There's no way I can pay you back. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, man.
Wonderful, isn't it? What a wonderful story. It makes me happy to be a human being today. Now, joining us is the founding member of the Street Store, V Leviton, who we spoke to about a year ago. Good morning. How are you, Kaylee?
Hi, I'm very well, thanks, and you?
Great to be talking to you again. When we spoke a year ago, you were just looking to help some people in Cape Town, and now you've gone global. It must be a great feeling.
Yeah, it's been the most amazing year. It's truly been overwhelming.
Tell us a little bit, about what time in the last year did it really become popular?
I think It was popular from the beginning in South Africa, and by March last year we had about 121 people who were involved in the process, and then we made our video, and it just exploded from there. Since that video, as you said, there's been 162 street stores around the world in 119 cities, and we've now had over 2,000 people sign up to host a street store in their community.
Social media has changed the game, hasn't it? Is this a case in point where you really see the power of social media?
Completely. The street store wasn't a social media or a digital campaign. It was something that worked in the real world. But if it weren't for the power of social media, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been possible at all. We would have been people sitting on the side of the road with posters and no one to make any donations. So it was through the way that you can spread information so easily on Twitter and Facebook's simple event hosting capabilities that we were able to really spread the word. And then once our video went out there, it just got shared with hundreds of thousands of people. And we just couldn't have ever done this by ourselves. And if it weren't for all those people around the world who helped us spread the word and share our story, we would have been nowhere.
An amazing story, and you're a credit to Cape Town and a credit to South Africa. But tell us now, what are you going to do next? Going forward, 2015, what's the plan?
We have a few ideas. As you can see, I'm by myself at the moment. My co-founder, Max Pazak, is away, so waiting for him to get back, and we're going to have a few things going on in the future. But at the moment, it's all about making sure that the street store keeps on spreading. And we want them to hit every city, not just 119 of them. So we want people to get involved around the world and really help us make this thing a reality for homeless people globally.
Well, thank you very much for the wonderful work that you do. That's Kaylee V Leviton, who, well, as founding member of the street store, they've really changed the lives of so many of the less fortunate people. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful contribution and the wonderful work that they do. Now, before we go, we've got to get an update on the flood crisis in Malawi. We've had a little bit of difficulty getting through. 63,000 hectares of land in Malawi are now underwater, displacing hundreds of people and presenting massive and complex challenges for governments and humanitarian allies. Now, in some villages, only the tops of banana trees can be seen emerging from the flood waters. Meanwhile, in neighboring Mozambique, fears are mounting again that fresh rains could cause even more havoc in the coming days. Floods that have ravaged the northern and central parts of Mozambique have killed 159 people and affected nearly 160,000. Both Malawi and Mozambique are in dire need of humanitarian assistance, but despite the call, reports suggest that the response from the international community has fallen dramatically short. Now, joining us on the line for the latest is Gift of the Giver spokesperson in Malawi, Jafar Jakura. Good morning, Jafar. Well, it seems as if we've lost Jafar. I would have loved to get an update. You know, the real story here is deep in the heart of Africa, we can't seem to get international aid agencies to help the flood victims. More than 160,000 in Malawi, 140 dead in Mozambique, but there's very little aid. Gift of the Givers are the only ones, and the South African Defence Force are the only ones that seem to be helping out. It's a real humanitarian crisis that's affecting thousands of people. Well, Jafar's back. Jafar, are you there?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Jafar, just give us the latest update. Is there any improvement on the ground with regards to international aid assisting you guys?
Yes, there is a lot of hype now with regard to international help. A lot of countries from outside are coming to the rescue of our country's devastation that has taken place arising from the floods. So we've got Germany, we've got UK, we've got South Africa in particular, as well as many other countries that have come through from Norway. And within the country also, our government is doing its best to try and reach out to people who are displaced.
Jafar, just give us an update then on the situation. It seems as if more rain is coming in the next couple of days. Is it going to cause more havoc?
Yes, indeed. The rain is our rainy season up until the month of April this year. And in between, there are patches where the downpour of rain is very, very heavy. Torrential rains are falling, which means that people are going to see more destruction taking place apart from the destruction that has already created a lot of havoc in the 15 districts of Malawi. So now it's a question of when do these rains come in naturally, where people can then try and live normal life, or wait for the heavy rains to stop in order to try and be rehabilitated in their various homes which have been destroyed, and to try and pick up their pieces of possessions they've lost as well. And the help that the international community, including our own organization, Gift of the Givers, is providing in many areas where people need food. There is looming hunger. On the number of people that have been affected countrywide is almost 700,000. There are about 174,000 people displaced, particularly in 3 districts in the southern region, known as Chikwawa, Sanje, Palombe. And there are schools that have got people living there in order to get out from the situation that they've been into. So something like half a million children are now displaced also from the regular schooling program. So everywhere, on every front, there are problems that the country is facing, but with the support that is coming from outside the country, within the country, a lot of goodwill is now on the ground to see that various challenges that are facing the country are fulfilled as we go along. Figures are astronomical. A lot of funds are required, cash, and a lot of assistance in kind is required. And this is going to be an ongoing exercise for a long time to come. It's not something that is going to be overnight.
Thank you very much, Jafar. Thank you.
Give them immediate relief items and then long-term rehabilitation exercise to make the lives of people who have been displaced to come back into normal way of living.
Jafar, thank you very much for that update. That is live from Malawi as it stands. It's nice to hear that the international bodies, countries and other organizations are now starting to chip in to help those people on the ground. Nice update there from Jafar. At times we can forget what happens to our neighbours here on the continent. That's where we wrap it. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also streaming live on YouTube, of course, right now, with the show, as always, available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You have been watching Newsroom. We love it.